Hello, everybody. Thanks everyone for joining. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm managing the waiting room. So we're just going to give it a couple minutes as people join. We've got quite a lot of people joining today, which is really cool and exciting. Okay. All right. Why don't we get started? We've got 20. Geez Louise, it won't stop. All right, so we've got about 27 people on. So thank you everybody for joining. I'm Emily Porro. I am the co-lead for the New York City chapter of Women in Cleantech and Sustainability. We are joined today by Katherine Markova, who is from Climate Interactive, and she is going to lead us through En-ROADS, which is a really cool program that was developed in partnership with MIT. And I just wanted to let you guys know, as we're going through this, it is a 1-hour workshop. We're going to learn a lot. But let's make sure that if we have questions that we save them for the end or we drop them in the chat. And Katherine will take the time at the end, 5 or 10 minutes at the end, to answer them along the way, to answer them as you drop them in along the way. I think that's it. Did I miss anything, Katherine?
No, I think that's it. That's
Okay,
great.
So thanks everybody, and take it away, Katherine.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Emily. Great to see you all here today. Thank you so much for joining us. The next hour will be really interactive. I hope we'll learn something, but also have some fun, even dare I say that, in the process. So just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Katherine Markova. I'm the head of partnerships at Climate Interactive. I started my career with a Big Four accounting firm in a field that had nothing to do with sustainability or tax. And then during COVID, I pivoted into climate work. But as an interim step, I also worked as a climate consultant for working with corporates to help them decarbonize, and also did a lot of climate risk assessment for companies, which is what we're here to talk about largely today. It's about climate solutions and climate risks. So Climate Interactive is a climate modeling and climate education organization. And as Emily said, in collaboration with MIT Sloan, we designed this renowned simulator called En-ROADS. The idea behind it was, you know how fighter pilots, they don't just like go through a training session and they go and start flying a plane. The interim step is to use some form of simulator, right? To make mistakes, learn from it, see what works, see what doesn't. And so the idea here is we've developed the simulator so that business leaders, policymakers, regulators could test for themselves the relative efficacy and impact of different climate solutions and really ground themselves in the latest available science. I'd love to hear either in the chat or just give me a shout. Have you ever heard of En-ROADS? Is anyone here familiar with En-ROADS? Just show of hands, or just if yes, say so in the chat. It doesn't look like it. Okay, that's good. That makes it even more interesting and exciting. So I will go ahead and introduce you to En-ROADS in a moment. The one thing I wanted to say right off the bat is it is a open source model. It's available to all of you to use at your leisure. It's free at the point of use. It's been translated into 21 languages. So if you have any co-workers that operate in different languages, it has been translated. And another thing I would say is that the model is based on system dynamics principles. And why don't I just go ahead and actually share it? This is the model. It's based on system dynamic principles. And because of that, what I find is that even people like yourselves who work in this field, who work in sustainability, work in climate, everyone discovers something new just because the idea behind it is to get people to understand what are the different feedback loops and time delays and trade-offs that are involved in these, first of all, the climate system, which is obviously very scientifically really difficult to wrap your head around, but also energy systems, land use systems, how they all interact. So this simulator is a global simulator and brings together thousands of different data points, hundreds of different peer-reviewed scientific papers. It has multiple calculations that are happening. So if I move a slider here, as you can see, things are changing right away. So it's one of the very few climate models that updates automatically. So you may be familiar with these big integrated assessment models that are really complex. You change one variable and it takes like a week to update. This one, you get feedback immediately. And that's the biggest advantage of it. So as I said, it's a global model. And I just want to say that upfront because climatic systems is a global system and there are many different interconnections. It's really difficult to do climate modeling for a sector or a specific country. It's, as I said, it's a global model. It essentially shows us what is the global average of all the different actions that are being taken on climate and what is the average and what is the collective combination of these technological progress, corporate actions, government policies, etc. And it really what it does, it allows you to test your mental models about the relative impact of climate solutions, right? What's it actually going to take for us as a global community to reach the goals of the Paris agreements? What needs to be done by corporates, governments, individuals, etc. So this is a control panel. As I said, it's an open source. It runs on a browser. It runs on an iPad. This is the control panel. We are showing you the baseline. The baseline means that this is kind of status quo, right? It shows you all the policies already in place, right? So like the Inflation Reduction Act, you'll all be familiar with that. It's baked into the system. So all the policies already in place and all the technological innovations and developments and progress ratios, that's all baked in. But then it assumes no further action on climate between now and end of the century, right? So the graphs you're seeing here, the first one is, this is where we get all of our energy, right? We consume energy in businesses, obviously in industry and households. All of these graphs, there are for the time frame is between years of 2000 and 2100, right, for the century. So that's consistent across all graphs that I'll show you. So we're tracking energy that is produced and consumed globally. And you can see coal, oil, gas, renewables growing. You see this renewables in green. So that's obviously a really good sign. Bioenergy, a little bit of nuclear, and then new zero. These are the new technologies that haven't been invented yet. And then here we're tracking greenhouse gas emissions. As you can see, they're steadily going up. A little bit of a COVID blip there for year 2020. And you can also, if you'd rather focus on temperature change, we have a graph for that. And you can see this is obviously where we want to be in terms of the goals of the Paris Agreement. And you can see where we are as of today. This model is updated every month, right? For, again, best available science, but also we're introducing new functionality. So we have hydrogen as fuel in development, as an example. But yeah, so as of today, we are at 1.38 degrees of warming globally. And you can also, by the way, I'm displaying this in Celsius, but you can also obviously see the Fahrenheit equivalent. So, so this is as a baseline status quo. However, we have all of these different solutions. When I say solutions, there's both government policies, but also corporate solutions and individual actions as well. So we have interventions around energy supply, right, where we get our energy from. So we can be taking action on coal, oil, natural gas, bioenergy. As you can see, again, it's forecast to grow very significantly. Renewables, so subsidizing renewable infrastructure, nuclear, new zero carbon pricing. In the middle is how we use that energy. So in terms of transport, electrification, energy efficiency, buildings, electrification, energy efficiency, population, economic growth. And then we have action around other gases rather than just carbon dioxide. So we have actions of methane and furanated gases. So we have actions around preventing deforestation, dealing with agricultural emissions, waste and leakage, technological CDR, and nature-based solutions. All right, to make this extra interactive, I would like you to tell me what you are really passionate about. Of all of this menu of options that we have, what are you most excited about? Or perhaps that's the field you already work in, or you think something has a lot of a promise. So you can either just put in this link into the browser, or probably the easiest thing to do is just to scan this QR code with your phone. Okay, excellent. And just drop a pin, next to the climate solution that you're really excited about. So we've got 1 vote for renewables. What else? By the way, you don't need to introduce yourself. You can just kind of click skip and just go ahead and tell us, give us your vote. So two votes for renewables. Let's keep going. There's a lot more of you on the call than just there's 35 of you. Agricultural emissions, okay. Electrification of transportation. New zero carbon, okay. Wonderful. All right, nature-based solutions. So this would be reforestation, afforestation, restoration of degraded forests. 2 votes for energy efficiency. That's great. More electrification of transportation. All right, deforestation. Okay. All right. Okay, nobody's excited about technological carbon dioxide removal. All right, renewables. Right. Okay, well, I think that gives us a good overview. So thank you for participating in that. I'm going to just leave that open so we can come back to it. All right, so most votes, transport, electrification, and renewables. All right, let's go and test them. So once again, we're 3.3 degrees warming. Where we'd like to be as a community is to get down to below 2 degrees or 1.5. And by the way, also, it's not just about the temperature, right? There's so many different impacts of climate change that, well, by the way, this graph, which I'll show, this impact graph we just released last week, right? And again, I've worked in this field now for several years. I'd never ever even considered that increases in global temperature, so CO2 concentration increases, had impact on crop nutrients and essentially nutritional value of crops, right? So this is actually the average of zinc, iron, and protein. So in this baseline scenario, so again, in black, our wheat crop will be losing about 10%, 11% of its nutrients, which, again, this is not something that I'd even considered, but definitely taking action on climate can also have these positive co-benefits. Similar to, so this is a health outcome. What about nature, right? We have a graph here showing species losing more than 50% of climatic range. This is the one that keeps you up at night. 50% of invertebrates by the end of the century will be losing more than 50% of their climatic range, which it's a mark of a sort of an extinction level event. So we have a lot of work to do. So just think about when I talk about the temperature, I'm talking about a lot more than just shaving off 0.7 of a degree from that 3.3. We'll talk about different impacts on health, human health, nature, biodiversity, air pollution as well. That's a big one. When we take action on fossil fuels, we'll also help on, it helps with air pollution from energy, as an example. All right, so transport electrification, electric vehicles. And by the way, in the model, you can go really, really deep if you want. You can, and also, by the way, just click on a triangle. It is a really good explainer as to what do we actually mean by electric transport subsidy and charging infrastructure, right? So you can go deep in the model, you can stay on the control panel. But so this, by taking action on electrifying transport in the model, what we actually mean is that we're subsidizing the purchase price of new vehicles, right? So again, Inflation Reduction Act provided some incentives. They exist in many other countries globally. So what if we were to subsidize purchase of electric cars, trucks, SUVs, rail, all sorts of different types of transportation? If I were to swing this lever all the way to the right, so it's maximum electrification, right? Which the way we translate this in the model is a certain percentage of purchase cost. So maximum support, everyone electrifies all the transportation in the world. I'd like you to think and make a mental prediction as to what you think is going to happen to the global temperature. So right now we're 3.3 degrees warming. If I were to move this all the way to the right, what do you think is going to happen to the temperature increase, right? So I'll just pause here for a second. I'll let you think about that. And then I'm going to move this. Okay, let's replay this. Interesting. So it shaves off 0.1 of Fahrenheit. So that's, are you surprised? I'd like to think, or I'd like to ask you, like, are you surprised by this? I bet you are. I was really surprised by this when I saw this for the first time as well. And that's not because electrification of or transport electrification is not a viable solution, but let's think about what else needs to happen. What other conditions do we need to create for this solution to be impactful? And again, I'm going to blow this up. And so this is our global sources of energy. I'm going to replay this and then see what happens. See what happens to all the different wedges here. So we've got oil in red. You can see oil's being squeezed out because we've just turned all of our internal engine combustion engines into electric engines, right? So we're kind of displacing our demand for oil. But look what happens with coal, look what happens with natural gas, look what happens with renewables. And in fact, we can take a look and see, all right, so demand for energy goes up when we electrify. That's a known fact. What happens to coal? Oh, okay. So, and let's take a look and see what happens to the demand for renewable energy as well. So what happens when we electrify transit is that demand for renewable energy goes up. That's really good. But also demand for other types of energy go up, right? So all the types of energy are always competing with other different types of energy, right? So if we require more electricity to power all these vehicles, then we'll also need to be addressing the fuel mix, the mix of our different types of fuels on the grid. Okay, so that's driver number one. Now, the other bit of this is actually a bit of good news is let's take a look and see what's actually happening with electric vehicles anyway. And I will have two graphs: electric share of transport sales and electric share of total transport. Okay, these graphs look a little bit similar. They're not. But look, first of all, baseline. So baseline, as I said, it's the future in which we take no action on climate. It's already going up. It's in fact in 2025. And again, I'll remind you, this is a global model. 6% globally of all transport sales, right? So this is new sales. 6% is electric. And by the end of the century, that is quote unquote forecast, not forecast by us, but forecast by all the different international energy agencies, all the different authorities that look at these sort of data, forecast to be 53% by the end of the century. So first of all, electric vehicle adoption is increasing regardless of any additional policies that we implement. Another thing that's happening is, so electric share of transport sales, right? Let's just see, to get to 30%, right? It's going to take until 2034, right? So it's going to take about 9 years to get to 30%. Now, if we look at this graph, which is electric share of total transport, so all the vehicles we have out there, what is the share that is electric? It's, okay, to get to 30% of the total, that's going to take us until 2042, right? And this shows, and I mentioned this model is based on system dynamics principles. And one of those system dynamic principles is what we call capital stock turnover, right? It takes time to replace existing stock of vehicles, right? If you have a perfectly functioning ICE vehicle, you're not going to just replace it with an electric one. You're probably going to see it till the end of its useful life, right? and then replace it. And that happens across household, and that happens in businesses and industry, right? So there's a delay. So there's going to be a delay in us replacing those vehicles. That's why it's not making as much of a difference right away. Okay, so let's go back. So we are still at 3.3. Many of you voted for renewable energy. So renewable energy, I was actually at a conference on Friday, and the chair of so I'm in Los Angeles, the chair of the California Energy Commission was doing a presentation. And I actually had no idea how much our state was doing on renewable energy deployment and electrification. Some of the numbers were just, I mean, I was astounded by. The biggest one of this is in the state. The biggest battery plant is in the state. We have more electric vehicle charging station now than gas nozzlers. I couldn't believe that. Everything is being electrified. Street sweepers, school buses, Frito-Lay delivery trucks. I mean, everything is being tugboats in San Francisco. So there's a lot of investment that is going to renewables. Okay, so once again, I'm going to swing this lever all the way to the right, maximum support for renewables. And if you want to go deep into the model, what this means is in the model is 5 cents per kilowatt hour subsidy, right? And it starts right away and it runs all the way to the end of the century. I'm not going to change any of these other settings, but you can also see that. What does hydrogen storage breakthrough? What does that mean? And what does that mean to renewable energy adoption? What does other storage breakthrough mean? And as I said, there's a lot more that you can do here. But I'm just going to assume that the entire world passes another IRA, right? Every single country, and the subsidy that is provided for the installation of new renewable energy infrastructure. And this is a blend. So we model this separately. We model solar and geothermal and wind separately, but then we bring it all together, sort of one renewable bucket. So 5 cents per kilowatt hour. What happens if I swing this lever all the way to the right? I want you to make a mental prediction. What's it going to do to 3.3 degrees? Make a mental prediction. I'm moving this all the way to the right. I bet you're surprised once again that it's not making as much of a difference. I mean, it's 0.3 degrees of Fahrenheit we've shaved off collectively between these two. So that's good. That's good. I mean, first of all, every fraction of a degree matters, because let's see what these actions have done. So there's a graph here on population exposed to sea level rise, and that's in millions, right? And look, and again, this is by the end of the century, right? We've just helped 4 million people globally avoid being exposed to sea level rise with this. So every fraction of a degree matters. 0.1. Why is it only 0.1? You'll be asking me, why does Climate Interactive not like renewable energy? We do like renewable energy, but once again, let's think about what conditions need to be created for renewable energy to be fully adopted. One is, you already identified, it's electrification, right? We need to electrify everything. Then we know that when we electrify, I've showed you that graph, demand for renewable energy goes up, right? So that's helping a little bit more. What else do we need to do? And once again, we don't actually need renewable energy for the sake of renewable energy, right? Well, all things being equal, I mean, we have obviously really big growing demands for renewable energy, particularly with data centers and AI. So we do definitely need more capacity on the grid. We do need more renewable energy infrastructure. But actually, what do we need renewables to be doing, right? And again, if I blow this up, we replay it, what happens? Look, what happens with gas? And I like to say methane gas. I don't like using the word natural gas because it's really methane gas. But what happens? Not much, right? So we've squeezed out a little bit of coal, more oil, but yeah, we actually need renewables to be competing and displacing fossil fuels, right? And so if at the same time as subsidizing new renewable energy, we're also taking action on fossil fuels. Oh, right. We're now 2.7. Right. Okay. So as you can see how these wedges have decreased. So that's great. What else? What else? So when I was a climate consultant, and companies would come to us and say, please, can you help me procure renewable energy in a market X? The first thing we would say, have you invested as much as you possibly can in energy efficiency, right? So we don't have to buy as much renewable energy in the first place, right? So we also need to invest in energy efficiency. Look, there's another 0.2 of a degree, right? So as you can see, how these different solutions work well together, and you're probably now starting to form a view that we sort of need a bit of everything, right? And some things work faster than others, right? So you see the two lines diverging, greenhouse gas emissions. So all these policies we've said will be effective immediately. We'll have a bit of a delay here for a couple of years, and we're not really seeing the biggest benefit until later in the century because of, again, capital stock turnover. So we talked about how for vehicles, it can take several years to replace a vehicle, ICE vehicles. You're probably unlikely to do that even with an incentive, unless your vehicle's at the end of its useful life. The same happens with fossil fuel infrastructure, right? We know that from studies that it could take up to 30 years to reduce utilization of fossil fuel production and then essentially phase it out. So that there's a time delay in all of this, okay? So energy, so electrification, energy, what else did you want to see? Okay, nature-based solutions. All right, let's go there next. Nature-based solutions, again, there's a cheat sheet here as to what that actually is. So encourage the expansion of forests, so afforestation, and then restoration of degraded forest, right? So those are the main ones. Obviously, there's a huge carbon credit market out there that develops these projects that then generate carbon credits. Here, so the way we showed in the model, it's like percentage of max potential. Now, one thing to bear in mind with afforestation and reforestation and nature-based solutions is we have a lot of different demands on land and land use, right? This is my favorite graph to show actually in the whole model. This, by the way, this can be explained to a high schooler, and we have done so. What causes climate change, right? And when asked this question, many people focus on specific, fossil fuels or specific activities, but actually it's a combination of these things, or a product of these things. We have a growing population, right? We've at happy family of 8 billion, and we're going to be at 10 billion, then it peaks and then it starts dropping again. But 10 billion people is what we are going to be facing, which is just mind-boggling to even imagine that sort of growth. But so growing population, right? That growing population is consuming increased amounts of GDP per capita. It's good news and bad news. Good news, we're lifting people out of poverty, and people are becoming affluent, particularly in low-income and middle-income countries. So that's great. But at the same time, this also signals overconsumption, people living beyond planetary boundaries, right? So it's kind of a combination of good news and bad news, but it continues to grow exponentially as well. Then we have energy intensity. So this GDP takes energy to produce, right? And energy intensity, see, even in the baseline, is falling, right? Because we're moving towards more service-oriented economies, away from heavy manufacturing. We are, in fact, I heard somebody mentioned the other day that in the US alone, FIRE, which is financial services, insurance, and real estate sectors, already account for 20% of the economy, right? Which wasn't the case in even just a couple of decades ago. So we're moving towards this economy where a lot of the GDP is actually coming from the financial sector, and we're just innovating, right? We're investing in R&D and constantly developing better products, learning from it, and so economies of scale. And then that energy also has carbon intensity. So this is your mix of renewables and fossil fuels on the grid. So if you think about that graph on the control panel, so carbon intensity is also falling as we're introducing more renewables on the grid. Again, that presentation I went to on Friday, 61% of California's energy now comes from renewables. We're well on track to 100% by 2045. So that's also good news. But if you multiply all those four out, global population consuming increased amounts of GDP that has certain energy intensity, that has certain carbon intensity, boom, CO2 emissions from energy, which is the biggest contributor of climate change. How do I know that? Because we have this graph. And obviously this is now with certain interventions here, but you could see like at the very beginning at 2025, say, or at the beginning of the century, but let's say 2025, where are the emissions coming from? Mainly from that gray, dark gray wedge in the middle, which is fossil fuel CO2. Yes, we do have land use CO2 as well from agriculture, and we have CH4 methane, again, from waste, for example. We have F-gases, so your refrigeration, but by and large, it's coming from fossil fuels, which is on this side of the control panel. So having said all of that, all right, nature-based solutions. So we have, as I said, afforestation, reforestation. Make a mental prediction. If I move the slider all the way to the right, what happens to the temperature increase? Think about it. 2.2. Okay, so that's quite effective. All right, but what is the challenge with this? Now, this is 100% of potential, and I'd like you to think about whether you think it's realistic. Because yes, we do have land that's available. And by the way, this just to give you some comparison, if we're talking about maximum afforestation, we're looking at, we'll need the land of the size of India twice, right? This is what it's showing by the end of the century. And look, it's interesting also how this is what's being forecast for the growth of the biochar industry. I didn't call it industry, but so some of it is afforestation, some of it is BECCS, you can't really see it, it's so small. But first of all, we have a challenge, which is, do we actually have enough land? Because we have showed you we have growing population, and we know when people being lifted out of poverty, that and incomes grow, household incomes grow, there's more consumption of meat, right? So we have different priorities and competing interests for land. So we have all these different initiatives that are focused on afforestation, reforestation, 30 by 30, right? We're supposed to be preserving 30% of land and setting it aside for rewilding and conservation. So we have all of those priorities. We have growing population that's going to be consuming more crops and meat. We have bioenergy. I don't think anyone voted for bioenergy. Okay, so in the baseline, you can still see it. So this pink wedge, bioenergy is actually forecast to grow quite dramatically. So I'll show you here. That's the baseline, right? So we're going to be burning, we'll need to burn, and particularly if you think about airlines, right? Sustainable aviation fuel. Right now, a lot of it comes from, grease and restaurants. It's not particularly scalable. One of the pathways that the airline industry is thinking about sustainable aviation fuel. So obviously there's electrification, there's hydrogen, there's multiple different pathways, but one of them is growing more crops, but not crops so much, but like forestry, extending forestry in order to, and timber, in order to burn it to produce sustainable aviation fuel. By the way, if I, with all this excitement about bioenergy, again, I want you to make a mental prediction. What happens if I move the slider all the way to the right and we subsidize bioenergy? It actually goes up. So the temperature is actually burning because you're still combusting you're still combusting organic material, so it does produce emissions. So there's, I think, a lot of maybe confusion is maybe the right word, around how sustainable bioenergy is in terms of a climate solution. And there's different types. There's sort of the waste that would have already, been there anyway, so you're not growing new crops. So maybe we're just utilizing waste vis-a-vis planting new trees to then burn. But multiple studies have concluded that actually burning of timber stocks to produce bioenergy is as bad as coal. And you can see that in the model, not just through emissions, but also in perspective of air pollution as well. But anyway, I digress. So we have all these different demands and competing priorities. So I would say, you make up your own mind as to how much of that potential you think is feasible. And as with all of these interventions, right, I'm moving the slide all the way to the right, but we always have to think about what is actually feasible? What can we do from the technological perspective? Also, one thing I didn't mention, and this is for anyone who wants to really go deep into the model, and I'll talk about some of the use cases particularly for corporate entities. But one of the things we have in the model is assumptions, right? So we have all these different Earth system assumptions, economy assumptions, energy, and also carbon capture and removals. And I don't think anyone voted for a direct air capture, but this is where you can go and change your settings. Like if you have a different view as to where we will go as the world, you have everyone right now has very different views about policy in particular, right? Both in the US and overseas, what's going to happen to climate policy. But yes, if you have different personal predictions around, to the extent which climate change slows economic growth, you can actually turn that off. That has a bit of an impact on the temperature increase. And, there's multiple different scientific papers that have been published. I mean, this is really, really advanced, but so you can change that. You can change the social discount rate and really go deep and change those assumptions. So I wanted to just point that out. Okay, so nature-based solutions absolutely helps, has multiple co-benefits. Think about biodiversity benefits, health, mental health even. So lots and lots of good co-benefits, but we also need to think about, is it actually realistic given we have all these different demands on land? All right, so what else did you vote for? Oh, a new zero carbon. Let's go there. So there's a lot of excitement right now about nuclear, revival of nuclear. Again, I keep quoting the California chair of CEC, but I'll mention it again. It was actually interesting. He was asked a question about nuclear in California, and he immediately said, nope, we're not building new nuclear because it's too expensive. And for anyone here that's really interested in the economics of energy and particularly renewable energy vis-a-vis other sources, so this is under this new scenario that we've just built. As you can see, so this is marginal cost of electricity production in cents per kilowatt hour from these different sources of energy, right? And so you could see that wind and solar surpassed coal in 2019 as the cheapest source, right? So a lot of people say that, right? Oh, like wind and solar is already the cheapest source of energy, but you can actually see that in the model, right? So we see that, and the marginal cost keeps falling and falling and falling, right? Because again, we have technological developments, we have improvements, we have scale. There's some of these wind turbines, particularly the ones offshore ones, they're just ginormous, right? One revolution can power a home for a month. I mean, it's crazy good. But yeah, so you can see where's nuclear in all of this. There's nuclear. So you have nuclear is much more expensive than obviously renewables, even more expensive than coal, more expensive than gas. And as you can see, it's not really, we're not seeing these breakthroughs that would make nuclear cheaper in anytime soon. So it is expensive. But yes, you want to talk about new zero carbon. What is new zero carbon? It's essentially different new types of technology for about which there's a lot of excitement. So first of all, nuclear fusion, and the other one is thorium-based nuclear fission. Okay. So once again, I'm going to move this all the way to the right, and then we need to make a mental prediction. With 2.3, we're getting really close to the goals of the Paris Agreement. What is going to happen with new zero carbon? So let's replay this. Shaves us 0.1 of degree in Fahrenheit. Again, every fraction of a degree matters. Think about those people exposed to sea level rise and the millions of them that will not be impacted as a result of this. So again, what are we seeing here? Let's take a look and see what's happening to the energy mix. All right, so the sand, the wedge has grown. Absolutely. When do we see it really starting to take shape, right? So this is us now in 2025. When do we actually start seeing it? I mean, I'm start seeing it about 2036. It's kind of barely noticeable, 2048, right? So what are we seeing? It's going to take time. It's going to take a long time. That's if it's successful, by the way, right? If it's successful, it's going to take a long time. Think back to capital stock turnover, right? And the how long these things take in terms of like policy, R&D, commercialization, scaling up, right? So we have all these different steps. And then what happens? Look at renewables as well. Look at renewables. Oh, renewables are being squeezed out. Well, I guess any financial analyst will tell you that we have limited capital, right? And we know again from not just the model, but just history that when we invest in one type of technology, particularly the one that is seen to be like groundbreaking, we typically take capital away from other technologies, right? So in this case, renewables are being squeezed out because we have limited capital. So there's that. All right, let's try something else. We really need to get to 2 degrees. What's left? Agricultural emissions. Okay, so this slide is other sources of greenhouse gases, right? So agricultural emissions. Essentially, main challenge with agricultural emissions is mainly methane. As you know, methane has much higher global warming potential. Where methane globally comes from, again, is different. Picture in California is very different to globally, for example, because we have big animal agriculture sector. But it's kind of 30, well, it's more like 30, 40, and 20. It comes from energy, obviously, and we know that pipelines sometimes leak, and obviously natural gas is mainly methane. So we have methane coming from energy production, we have methane coming from agriculture, and then methane coming from waste. So by adopting better practices in agriculture, so for example, I don't know, better manure management, and having more efficient like lagoons of manure and anaerobic digesters, right, that burn and turn that into fuel. All these different practices help, and livestock feeds, right? There's a lot of excitement about different livestock feeds right now. So we can model out the impact of adopting these best practices. Think about, again, mental model. We're building a mental model. What's going to happen if I move this slider all the way to left? Okay, we've shaved off another 0.1 of a degree, or 0.2 even. Oh, done. Yeah, let me see, 0.2, fantastic. All right, we're really close. I'm just going to move us to 2.1 just for the sake of it. So, oh, there you go. That's 1.9 is where we'll end up. Let's see what happens to all the things we care about. Oh, by the way, I didn't even show you the maps. So we have maps as well. And this is really helpful for anyone that's using this model to do physical risk analysis. So let's see, let's make it like relatable. And I said, I'm Los Angeles, take a look at what's happening to heat. So this is a sea level rise map. And this is actually an external feed from our collaborators at Climate Central. So they feed us the map, and we then, with our temperature increase, which is now at 1.9, we then see, well, what does that actually do to existing maps, right? And more importantly, as you can see in blue, so that's land at risk, but also in green, land saved by actions. And this is, I said, this is really helpful. You can downscale this to zip code to see how much with this particular scenario. You can also look at it under different timeframes as well. Now, how much does actually going from 3.3 to 1.9, how much of that actually protects some of these areas, like Lyndhurst, for example? I'm just showing you places here that are most impacted. And then also, what does that do to heat in Los Angeles? So you can actually toggle between, as you can see, it goes from baseline to current scenario, baseline to current scenario. Okay, well, Los Angeles sounds like we're going to be exposed to anywhere between 3 and 6 months of days above 90 degrees. But there are some other places that with good climate solutions and policies, we can actually protect to some extent, so limited to 3 months rather than 3 to 6 months. And again, you can look at it under different timeframes as well. It seems like it's, yeah, so toggle between the two and actually see, and this is 22 by 22. So again, you can really drill down and look at physical risks if you're doing physical risk analysis. And we'll also have maps on prolonged drought. So likelihood of drought, again, something we have to contend with here in LA. And then also I'll show you just for completeness, wildfire danger days as well. But again, the idea here is not to get depressed about how bad things are going to get, but rather see, okay, well, how much better can it be with this collective scenario that we've just built? And by the way, I can share this scenario. I can share it by email. I can copy. This is a unique URL that we've just created. This is a unique scenario which you can share, and you can also download data. I mentioned languages before, so it's the model's available in 21 languages. Everything is transparent. We have the user guide. We have technical reference. I think I've said as much. So well done, first of all. Well done on getting us to 1.9. Well, almost. So that hopefully that was a really good, helpful exercise. Before we dive into questions, I just wanted to tell you about how, and I might actually just stop sharing this. I'll tell you about how the corporate sector, I think most of you here will be from a corporate sector, how it's being used by companies. So the original use case for this is education. Education capacity building. So that's with boards, we've run workshops with boards of directors, run workshops with sustainability teams. HSBC USA, they trained 2,600 of their employees using En-ROADS. And that's when they were setting their net zero target at the time, and they really needed to build capacity to let people know, what does that actually mean for you in finance, or for you in supply chain, or for you in legal. So education capacity building, definitely the original use cases. Some companies also use En-ROADS for risk analysis, and particularly for scenario analysis, right? As I'm sure you know, there's a lot of regulation that's coming, like SB 261 and EU Corporate Sustainability Disclosure Directive. All of these pieces of legislation that require scenario analysis to be undertaken. And not only that, you also have to show your workings. So you have to show why you've chosen a particular scenario, how you got comfortable over inputs and assumptions. And what I find from my experience is that these existing scenarios like NGFS and IA scenarios, they're pretty fixed, right? You're kind of stuck with it. So you're modeling against what would it mean for me, for my business, if we're 2 degrees of warming and we're like 5 degrees of warming, right? This allows you to actually make it a little bit more interesting by building your own scenario, like based on your own assumptions. Many business leaders I speak to, they have certain ideas about what's going to happen to global carbon pricing, right? We're still stuck at $5 an average carbon price globally. I know this is where there are differences between jurisdictions, but so you can really use it to sort of experiment and build your own scenarios. So that's another use case that I'm really excited about is supply education. A lot of the big companies now, because they have to report on their climate risks and emissions, they're having to educate their suppliers as well, that don't necessarily have the capacity. So you can use this to run a workshop for them. And then you can really go down deep into like, what does that mean for me as a company, my glide path, my scopes of emissions and all the different interventions that I'm planning to do. But this allows you to like really ground everyone in what's happening globally first before you dive into the detail. So that's all I wanted to say. We have a few minutes for questions. I see we have a lot of questions in the chat.
Well,
Emily,
there's a couple questions. I've been watching them. So I'll read out two. Actually, maybe there's more now. The first one is, how can we access the underlying models, formulas, and calculation methods?
Yep, a great question. So I will go back and share my screen. All right. So as I said, everything is totally transparent. We have, so En-ROAD's user guide. The best thing to show you is En-ROAD structure. This is what's happening behind the scenes. This is a simplified version of what's happening behind the scenes. You have all these different data inputs from land use models, energy models, as I said, the population, consumption, GDP growth, all of that is interacting behind the scenes. Now, what you have is you have all of this information on it's very, very comprehensive. And this is, by the way, this is a user guide. This is meant to be really easy to read. We also have a technical reference guide, which is full of calculations, as you said. So we have key dynamics, potential co-benefits, we have embedded videos, slider settings, model structure, case studies, and FAQs as well, right? So, why aren't coal and natural gas, carbon capture and storage technology included in technological carbon? It really goes deep, and you have all these different references and footnotes. So you have calculations, you have initial conditions. By the way, one thing I didn't show is very often we get a question, how do you get comfortable that your model is actually accurate? And we go, well, the model actually starts in the year 1990, right? And so this is where we have our initial conditions. We compare ourselves. So we compare ourselves to marginal cost of solar electricity history. We compare ourselves to Lazard and IRENA and IEA, right? And we're on track. We compare ourselves to the Met Office and NASA on temperature. We are on track. There's En-ROAD's baseline in black. So we do compare ourselves. Sometimes we have to correct calculations to make sure we are tracking. But yes, so it's all there. You can access the user guide and the technical reference. And we have free training as well you can take as well and get your employees and co-workers to take. So it's all there. It's all there for you to use. So.
One other question, and I was curious about this as well, so I'm glad somebody asked it. Does En-ROADS already intake energy demand projections related to the rise of AI?
Excellent question. Excellent question. We actually just wrote an FAQ on that for our website because it keeps coming up. The answer is we don't know for certain. We don't think so. And I'll let me share my screen again. I'll show you why. So the data on global sources of primary energy, that data, if you click on this triangle, it actually tells you where it comes from. It comes from these 4 data sources. The main one, the IEA, International Energy Agency, World Energy Balances. As you can see, this data set. So the data set that was released last year, this is the latest available, covers 1990 to 2022. Now, I was thinking when ChatGPT really sort of became a thing, and I don't think it was in 2022. So I don't think that the IEA and EI, I don't think any of these sources, they may well predict growth of data centers, kind of business as usual. I don't think at that point in time, these authorities were thinking about, ChatGPT and other models and chatbots and really rise of AI. So to answer your question, when these are revised to take into account growth of AI and data centers, we will revise our model. But right now, I don't think so, because without going really, really deep into the assumptions they're making, we can't be sure, but we don't think so.
Yeah, I think that 2022 was the very first end of the year was the very first release for ChatGPT. Okay.
Right.
How would you recommend we leverage this tool in our day-to-day conversations to move climate conversations forward?
Excellent question, and thank you for asking it. Again, as I said, it really, you can meet people where they are with this model, right? I've run workshops for boards of directors that haven't even thought about climate change. And these are smaller companies rather than obviously large public companies. So you can start right at the beginning, like ask a question, like, what causes climate change? Let's just ground ourselves in that. You can meet people in a more sophisticated place where perhaps we're all aware of climate change. And maybe what we want to do is like stress test our own strategies. Like, are we doing enough? Is just investing in renewables, is that enough? Is our supply chain, are we impacted by deforestation? What's going to happen? I mean, nature is a classic one right now. There's so many conversations around about what impact will climate change have on nature outcomes, and does it impact on my suppliers? Does it impact on me, right? So again, you can have an intelligent conversation around, okay, sounds like we're losing 20%. So our crop yield on maize globally is going to decrease by 20%, right? How many millions of people rely on that crop? What is that going to do to just generally the supply chains? What's going to do to migration? So you can have a really, really intense conversation around where are we going as a world and what needs to happen. That's more kind of a philosophical one. The more practical one, as I said, you can build capacity among your teams, among suppliers, but you can also just go and find what's of interest to you. As I said, like, I was talking to a pension fund the other day, and they're really concerned, obviously, about costs and their financial metrics, and they are really concerned about I think they've just realized how much global GDP will, and they obviously have exposure to all sectors of the economy, so they're worried about that. They have to look to the end of the century. Obviously, they're not focused on short-term projections. They're looking all the way out to the end of the century. And what the model is telling them is that we're already losing 9% of global GDP to climate impacts, right? And I'm not just talking about one-off events. This is like more systemic. But how climate change mitigation is important to also safeguarding our global GDP growth, so we don't end up with another global crisis. So you can meet people where they are. You can start with like really basic capacity building and education at all levels of organization, particularly those people that haven't had to think about climate change. As I said, all the people that would have to feed into your reporting process at some point. Or you can have a more sophisticated use case around data and modeling. And I showed you the maps, right? So you actually have, what you have here is a physical risk tool and a transition risk tool. And you can see what does a high carbon price mean for climate risks in the zip code where the factory, right? So it's that basic. Now, this isn't going to be the only tool you'll be using, of course. You have more sophisticated tools that you'll need, like MSCI and other databases and tools, but this could be one of them that could supplement your toolkit. So hopefully that answers the question.
There's one last question here. Do any corporate partners use En-ROADS to then enact an emissions reduction plan, or is that or does that require different tools?
Yeah, so as I said, this is not a glide path. You can't like overlay your scopes of emissions here. Obviously, anything you do has to be also dependent on your sector and the size of your organization and supply chain. But what I would say is there are, like, Pepsi is a classic example. One of our ambassadors is head of sustainability at Pepsi, and they actually, as they ran a workshop and said, well, this is what we're doing as a company. Let's just, like, if we, Pepsi with the world, right, if we extrapolate that out, if this is what we're doing, is this going to be enough globally, right? So you can kind of run it in that sort of way. And then also, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Sorry, it's been a long morning. But yes, so you can, I guess you can, as I said, it's not going to be the only tool that you use. It can be a good supplement to your other tools that you're using, like say glide path. You can sense check it. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Yes, so another use case for this is, it's kind of like AllianceBernstein, which is a big asset manager. How they've used it is they essentially built this, they built En-ROADS into all the other tools that they have, which they use for modeling, for climate risk assessment, for decarbonization. What they were really focused on this sort of GDP growth. So they built a series of scenarios to say, like, okay, what happens if we lose that much GDP, that much GDP, that much GDP? And that fed in, there was an input into the other models that they used to then inform them what decarbonization targets they needed to set for their sectors that they are invested in. So, as I said, there are multiple use cases here. It's not a complete shoe-in for your decarbonization strategy, but there are different ways that you can supplement En-ROADS with those other tools and models.
Okay, well, I know that we are at time. So thank you everybody for joining. Thank you so much, Katherine. This has been super enlightening, interesting. And thank you so much for dropping the link into the chat. Is there anything else, I guess?
I'm just going to, if that's okay, also share my email address.
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah, if anyone wants to know more, please get in touch. Yeah, thank you for being here. I hope you found this valuable, and yeah, have a great rest of the day.
Okay, thank you so much.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.